Colorado Territory, 1879. Dust swirled across the main street of Silverdale as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the weathered wooden buildings. The small mining town stood nestled between towering mountains, a place where fortunes were made and lost on claims, and where reputations were just as volatile as the silver market. It was a place where a man could reinvent himself, but a woman was forever bound by the whispers that followed her like persistent shadows. Vincent Hayward dismounted from his chestnut stallion and tied the reins to the hitching post outside the general store. At 25, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. His broad shoulders and lean build spoke of hard work under the unforgiving western sun, while his clean-shaven face and clear blue eyes gave him a youthful appearance that belied the years he'd spent driving cattle across the plains. He adjusted his well-worn Stetson and dusted off his simple cotton shirt and denim trousers before entering the store. The bell above the door announced his arrival, and several heads turned to inspect the newcomer. Vincent had only been in Silverdale for 3 weeks, hired on as foreman at the Rocking M Ranch outside of town. So far, he'd kept mostly to himself, believing that attachments only complicated a man's life on the frontier. The West was no place for sentimentality. It was about survival, moving on when necessary, and never letting down your guard. As he placed his order for supplies with the shopkeeper, the bell rang again. The store fell silent, conversations cutting off mid-sentence. Vincent turned to see what had caused the sudden change in atmosphere. She stood framed in the doorway, sunlight silhouetting her slender figure. Madeleine Montgomery was 22 years old with raven-black hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her simple blue calico dress was modest but well-fitted, and though it bore signs of careful mending, it was immaculately clean. Her features were delicate, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and full lips currently pressed together in determination. But it was her eyes that caught Vincent's attention, deep green and filled with a quiet defiance that seemed to challenge anyone who dared to look directly at her. "Good afternoon, Mr. Phillips," she said to the shopkeeper, her voice soft but clear. The shopkeeper nodded curtly. "Miss Montgomery, what can I help you with?" "I need some flour, sugar, and coffee, please. And some thread if you have blue to match this." She placed a scrap of fabric on the counter. Vincent observed how the other customers edged away, mothers pulling their children closer, men turning their backs. The woman seemed to take up as little space as possible, her shoulders straight but her eyes now downcast. "Put it on my account, please," she added. "Your account's getting rather high, Miss Montgomery," the shopkeeper said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Not sure I can extend any more credit." A flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks, but before she could respond, Vincent stepped forward. "Add her items to my order," he said. "I'll settle up." Both the shopkeeper and the woman looked at him with surprise. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "I insist, ma'am." Vincent tipped his hat slightly. "Vincent Hayward, new foreman at the Rocking M." Her green eyes studied him warily. "Madeleine Montgomery, and I don't accept charity, Mr. Hayward." "Not charity, just a neighborly gesture. You can repay me whenever it's convenient." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Thank you. I'll repay you next week." The transaction complete, Vincent helped carry her packages outside. He couldn't help noticing how people on the boardwalk crossed to the other side of the street as they approached, or how the whispers followed them like tumbleweeds. "Do you have far to go?" he asked, glancing at the darkening sky. "Just outside town, I have my wagon." She gestured to a small wagon hitched to an aging mare. "Allow me to escort you home, Miss Montgomery. It'll be dark soon." "That's kind but unnecessary." And she hesitated, glancing around at the staring townspeople. "You don't want to be seen with me. It won't do your reputation any good." Vincent frowned. "I form my own opinions of people, Miss Montgomery." "That's a luxury most can't afford in Silverdale." She climbed onto her wagon seat with practiced ease. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Hayward, but a word of advice. Keep your distance from me if you want to succeed here." With a flick of the reins, she set off, leaving Vincent standing in the dusty street, watching her diminishing figure with curiosity. In his 7 years of drifting across the Western Territories, he'd learned to read people quickly, a skill that had saved his life more than once. And something told him there was more to Madeleine Montgomery than the town's evident disdain suggested. That evening at the Rocking M bunkhouse, Vincent sat at the rough-hewn table, cleaning his revolver as the other hands played cards. When he casually mentioned meeting Madeleine Montgomery, the card game halted abruptly. The Montgomery woman, Pete, the oldest ranch hand, raised his bushy eyebrows. Best steer clear of that one, boy. What's her story? Vincent asked, keeping his voice neutral as he reassembled his gun. Arrived here about 2 years ago with her pa, said Pete. Old man Montgomery was a doctor, but he took sick and died just 6 months later, left her alone in that cabin of theirs. That hardly seems reason enough for the town to shun her, Vincent observed. The men exchanged glances. There's more, Pete continued. Sheriff found her standing over the body of James Blackwell last winter, bloody knife in her hand. Blackwell was a prosperous mine owner, respected man in town. She killed him, Vincent asked, his interest piqued despite himself. Claimed it was self-defense, another hand named Hank interjected. Said he forced his way into her cabin, tried to, well, you know, he glanced around uncomfortably. Judge from Denver came for the trial, Pete continued. She got acquitted, lack of evidence or some such, but folks round here, they made up their minds. No smoke without fire, they say. And no one believes her side of the story, Vincent pressed. Blackwell had a wife and kids, Pete shrugged. Was a church-going man. The Montgomery woman keeps to herself, lives alone, unmarried. Folks don't trust that. Plus, she's taken to doctoring like her pa did, setting bones, delivering babies, mixing medicines. Some call it witchcraft. Vincent holstered his revolver, considering this information. A woman alone had few protections on the frontier and fewer allies once branded with suspicion. Anyway, Pete concluded, you're new here. Take my advice and stay clear of her. That woman's nothing but trouble. Vincent nodded noncommittally, but as he lay in his bunk that night, he couldn't shake the image of those defiant green eyes, or the quiet dignity with which Madeleine had faced the town's contempt. In his experience, people were rarely what they seemed on the surface, and he'd learned long ago that the truth often lay buried beneath layers of rumor and assumption. The next day, Vincent rode fence lines under the vast Colorado sky, repairing brakes and checking for strays. The work was solitary but straightforward, just how he preferred it. At 25, he'd already seen enough of the West's harsh realities to know that keeping to himself was the safest way to live. Getting involved with others only meant pain when the inevitable separation came. Better to do his job well, save his money, and move on when the time came. As the sun began to sink behind the mountains, Vincent spotted a thin curl of smoke rising from a small valley nestled between two hills. Curious, he rode toward it and soon came upon a modest cabin with a well-kept garden and a small barn. A wagon he recognized from town was parked outside, so this was where Madeleine Montgomery lived. He was about to turn back when he heard a sharp cry followed by an angry shout. Drawing his revolver, Vincent dismounted and approached cautiously. Through the cabin window, he could see Madeleine backing away from a large man who was advancing on her, his face contorted with rage. Without hesitation, Vincent strode to the door and knocked firmly. The voices inside fell silent. "Miss Montgomery, it's Vincent Hayward, just checking if everything's all right." After a moment, the door opened to reveal Madeleine, her face composed but her eyes wary. Behind her, a burly man with a prospector's beard scowled. "Mr. Hayward," she said with remarkable calm, "this is unexpected. I was riding by, saw your place." Vincent kept his hand near his holstered gun, eyes on the man. "Thought I'd stop and settle when you might want to repay that store debt." She caught his meaning instantly. How thoughtful, Mr. Garrett here was just leaving. The man named Garrett spat on the floor. "This ain't over, Madeleine. The town council won't stand for your kind much longer." "Good evening, Mr. Garrett," she replied coldly. With a final glare at both of them, Garrett pushed past Vincent and stomped to his horse. They watched in silence as he rode away. "Are you hurt?" Vincent asked once the man was out of sight. "No," she sighed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thomas Garrett is all bluster. He was Blackwell's business partner. Comes by occasionally to threaten me, hoping I'll abandon my father's property. There's a rumor of silver on this land." "Does the sheriff know?" A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Sheriff Wilkins, he's Garrett's cousin. Besides, who would take my word over his?" She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Hayward? It seems I owe you twice now." Vincent hesitated only briefly before entering. The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, with handmade curtains brightening the windows and shelves lined with books and jars of herbs. A medical bag similar to those carried by army surgeons sat on a side table. "You're a doctor?" he asked as she put a kettle on the stove. "My father was. I assisted him from the time I was 14. I learned what I could." She measured coffee grounds carefully. "It's not a title anyone would grant a woman officially, but I have my father's knowledge. Sometimes, when they're desperate enough, even those who despise me will seek my help. That must be difficult. She shrugged. I do what needs doing. The same as you, I expect. As they sipped coffee, Vincent found himself strangely comfortable in her presence. Madeleine spoke of her childhood in Boston, her father's decision to move west after her mother's death, and her love for the mountain landscape. She carefully avoided any mention of Blackwell or her subsequent ostracism, but Vincent could see the toll it had taken in the wariness that never quite left her eyes. "And you, Mr. Hayward?" she asked eventually. "What brings a man like you to Silverdale?" "Just passing through like everywhere else," he replied. 7 years moving from ranch to ranch across the territories. No place to call home. The question unsettled him. The West isn't about putting down roots, it's about survival. Is it? She studied him thoughtfully. My father believed the West was about building something new. Creating communities where people could start fresh, unburdened by old prejudices. Vincent gave a short laugh. With respect, Miss Montgomery, your situation suggests otherwise. Her smile held a surprising warmth, perhaps. Or perhaps I'm simply ahead of my time. As dusk deepened into night, Vincent reluctantly took his leave. I'll check on you again when I can, he promised. If Garrett returns, fire 3 shots in the air. I'll hear it from the ranch. That won't be necessary, she insisted. I've managed thus far. Nonetheless, the offer stands. He mounted his horse, tipping his hat. Good night, Miss Montgomery. Good night, Mr. Hayward, and thank you for seeing me as more than what they say I am. As Vincent rode back to the ranch under a blanket of stars, he found himself troubled by emotions he'd long suppressed. Madeleine Montgomery challenged everything he believed about keeping his distance, about the harshness of frontier life requiring isolation. For the first time in years, he felt a connection to another person, and it terrified him. Over the following weeks, Vincent found reasons to ride past Madeleine's cabin regularly. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a newspaper from Denver, coffee beans, or fresh game he'd hunted. She accepted these offerings with graceful thanks and often invited him to stay for a meal or coffee. During these visits, he learned more about her skills as a healer. She showed him her garden of medicinal herbs and explained their properties. He watched her set the broken arm of a ranch hand who'd sought her help in secret, marveling at her steady hands and confident manner. "Why do you stay?" he asked her one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "You could go somewhere new, start over where no one knows your past." She considered this, twisting a strand of her raven hair around one finger. "This land was my father's dream, our dream. Running away would mean they've won. That lies and fear are stronger than truth." She looked at him directly. "Besides, where would I go? Women alone have few options in this world, Mr. Hayward." "Vincent," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think you might call me Vincent." Her smile transformed her face, softening the guardedness he'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Vincent, then, and I'm Madeleine." That night, riding back under a crescent moon, Vincent confronted an uncomfortable truth. He was falling in love with Madeleine Montgomery. The realization shook him. Love had no place in his carefully constructed philosophy of detachment. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got people killed on the frontier. His inner conflict became apparent to the other hands. At the Rocking M, he grew distracted, missed signals during cattle work, and spent more time alone than usual. The ranch owner, Michael Rogers, finally confronted him after he misunderstood instructions about moving a herd to new pasture. "Something's eating at you, Hayward," Rogers said bluntly. "And word is you've been calling on the Montgomery woman." Vincent stiffened. "My personal affairs aren't relevant to my work, sir. They are when they affect your performance. And when they potentially damage this ranch's reputation." Rogers sighed. "Look, you're the best foreman I've had in years, but that woman is trouble. With all due respect, sir, Madeleine Montgomery is a skilled healer who's been unfairly judged by this town." "Maybe so," Rogers conceded. "But perception matters out here. The Rocking M does business with everyone in this valley. If my foreman takes up with a woman suspected of murder—" "She was acquitted," Vincent said sharply. "Courts make mistakes. Either way, you need to make a choice, Hayward. Your job here or your friendship with that woman." The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Vincent removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy hair as he considered his response. "I'll have my decision by morning, sir." That night Vincent rode to Madeleine's cabin, his mind in turmoil. The lights were on inside, and as he approached he heard voices, Madeleine's and a man's. Cautiously he peered through the window. Madeleine was treating a young man Vincent recognized as one of the miners from town. Her face was set in concentration as she cleaned and bandaged what appeared to be a serious gash on his arm. "You're lucky," he heard her say. "Any deeper and you might have lost the use of your hand." "Thank you, Miss Montgomery," the miner said sheepishly. "I know I shouldn't have come, but Doc Wilson was drunk again, and I remembered how you helped Simmons when that cave-in crushed his leg. I'm glad you did, but you need to keep this clean and come back in 3 days so I can check for infection." "I will, and I'll pay you proper once we hit a new vein. Been dry for weeks now." "Just focus on healing, the payment can wait." After the miner left, Vincent knocked. Madeleine opened the door, surprise and pleasure lighting her features when she saw him. "Vincent, I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I needed to see you," he said simply, following her inside. She must have read something in his expression, for her smile faded. "What's happened?" He told her about Roger's ultimatum, watching her face carefully as understanding dawned. "So you've come to say goodbye," she said quietly, turning away to wash her hands in the basin. "No," the firmness in his own voice surprised him. "I've come to ask you something." She turned back, confusion evident in her green eyes. Vincent took a deep breath, suddenly aware that he was crossing a line he'd drawn for himself years ago, never to become so attached to anyone or anything that leaving would cause pain. "I've spent 7 years drifting, Madeleine. Convincing myself that attachments are dangerous, that the only way to survive out here is to remain unencumbered." He stepped closer to her. "But these past weeks with you have shown me how empty that existence has been." "What are you saying, Vincent?" "I'm saying I don't want the job if it means giving you up. I'm saying," he hesitated, then committed himself fully. "I'm saying I love you, Madeleine Montgomery, and if you'll have me, I want to build something here with you." Her eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, he thought he'd misjudged everything. Then she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Vincent, think about what you're saying. I'm an outcast here. Loving me means sharing that burden. I don't care what this town thinks. I care about you, your courage, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to abandon what's right." He squeezed her hand. "But I need to know if there's any chance you might feel the same." The vulnerability in her expression gave way to something softer, something that made his heart race. "I do," she whispered. "God help me, I do love you, but I'm afraid for you, what this might cost you." "The only thing I'm afraid of is losing you," he said, drawing her closer. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent. When they finally parted, breathless, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Madeleine. Let's face this town together." Her laugh was shaky with emotion. "You certainly don't waste time once your mind is made up." "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she said, her smile radiant. "Yes, Vincent Hayward. I'll marry you." The following day, Vincent resigned from the rocking M. Rogers, accepted his decision with evident disappointment, but offered a month's wages as parting compensation. By midday, Vincent had moved his few possessions to Madeleine's cabin and begun planning their future. The news of their engagement spread through Silverdale like wildfire. Some reactions were predictably hostile. Shopkeepers suddenly had no merchandise to sell them, and the local minister initially refused to perform the ceremony. But to Vincent's surprise, there were also unexpected allies. Pete from the ranch visited, awkwardly offering congratulations and a wedding gift of hand-carved wooden spoons. The young miner Madeleine had returned with several friends, offering to help repair her barn roof as payment for her medical services. 3 weeks into their engagement, however, their fragile happiness was threatened. Vincent returned from hunting to find Madeleine's front door splintered open and the cabin in disarray. Heart-pounding, he searched frantically, finding no sign of her until he noticed boot prints leading toward the creek. Following the trail, he heard voices before he saw them, Madeleine's, tight with fear, and the deeper tones of Thomas Garrett and another man. "This land is rightfully mine," Garrett was saying as Vincent crept closer, drawing his revolver. "Blackwell found the silver vein before you killed him. We were partners." "There is no silver here," Madeleine insisted, "and I didn't kill James. He attacked me when I refused his advances. The court believed me." "Courts can be fooled by a pretty face," the second man said. "Sheriff Wilkins," Vincent realized, "but we know the truth. Sign over the deed, and maybe we'll let you and your cowboy leave town intact." Vincent stepped into the clearing, his gun aimed steadily. "I suggest you step away from my fiancée, gentlemen." Both men whirled to face him. The sheriff had his hand on his gun but hadn't drawn. "This is official business, Hayward," Wilkins said coldly. "Miss Montgomery is being questioned about new evidence in the Blackwell murder." "Convenient timing," Vincent observed. "Right after we announced our plans to develop this property." Garrett sneered. "You're outnumbered, Cowboy, and your word against the sheriffs won't count for much." "Perhaps not," came a new voice from behind them, "but mine might." All heads turned to see the judge who had presided over Madeleine's trial, accompanied by 2 U.S. Marshals. Judge Samuel Edwards was a formidable figure, tall and stern in his black coat. "Judge Edwards," Sheriff Wilkins stuttered, "we didn't expect you until tomorrow's town council meeting." "Clearly," the judge said dryly. "Marshal Thompson, please disarm these men while we sort this out." As the marshals took control of the situation, the judge explained his presence. He had received anonymous letters suggesting corruption in Silverdale's law enforcement and had come to investigate. The incident at the creek only confirmed his suspicions. "Miss Montgomery," he said kindly, "it seems you've been the victim of a conspiracy. Mr. Garrett here stood to gain considerably from your conviction or removal." The truth emerged rapidly after that. James Blackwell had discovered silver on Montgomery land, but had kept the information from his partner Garrett, planning to force Madeleine into marriage to gain control of the property legally. When she rejected and ultimately killed him in self-defense, Garrett and the sheriff had conspired to either convict her of murder or drive her away through ostracism. By evening, Sheriff Wilkins and Thomas Garrett were in custody, facing federal charges for conspiracy and attempted fraud. Judge Edwards personally apologized to Madeleine for the ordeal she'd endured. "There will be a proper investigation now," he promised, "and compensation for the harassment you've suffered." As news of the arrest spread through town, attitudes toward Madeleine began to shift. People who had crossed the street to avoid her now nodded in greeting. The minister who had refused to marry them suddenly found his schedule open for their preferred date. 2 weeks later, Vincent stood beside Madeleine in the small Silverdale church, which was surprisingly full. Pete and several rocking hands occupied one pew. The young miner and his friends filled another. Even Michael Rogers had come, offering Vincent his job back with a substantial raise, an offer Vincent had politely declined. Madeleine was radiant in a simple white dress, her raven hair adorned with wildflowers. As they exchanged vows, Vincent marveled at how dramatically his life had changed in just 2 months. From a man determined to remain unattached to a husband and soon-to-be partner in a new venture, the Montgomery Hayward Medical Practice and Silver Mining Company. Judge Edwards had helped them secure proper mining rights and investment capital to develop the silver vein that did indeed run beneath their property. The profits would fund a proper clinic where Madeleine could practice medicine openly, with plans to send for formal training in Denver when the mine was established. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss the bride." As Vincent kissed Madeleine to the applause of their guests, he realized how wrong he had been about the frontier. It wasn't a place where love was impossible, it was a place where love was essential, the foundation upon which everything else could be built. Later, as they danced at their small reception in the town hall, Madeleine leaned close to whisper in his ear, "Did you ever imagine, when you first saw me in the general store, that we'd end up here?" Vincent smiled, thinking of the lonely, guarded man he'd been just months before. "No, I thought I knew everything about survival out here, but you taught me the difference between surviving and living." "And what is that difference?" she asked, her green eyes sparkling. "Surviving is what you do alone," he said, drawing her closer. "Living is what we do together." As the autumn sun set over the mountains of Silverdale, casting long golden light through the windows, Vincent and Madeleine Hayward continued their dance, no longer outcasts but pioneers of a different sort, forging a life built on truth, justice, and a love strong enough to withstand the harshest frontier.